Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. Today is Thursday, July 22nd. Great episode again today. We've got newly elected Select Board Member Miriam Aschkenasy, and she's going to share with us what it's been like on the Select Board in the first few months, some of her experiences, surprises, and accomplishments. And so that's going to be great. We'll cut to that in just a few minutes. But first, as always, the news nationally. The bootleg fire in Oregon has been blazing for over 2 weeks. It's burned more than 530 square miles of southern Oregon, and the smoke has made its way all across America. We had some terrible haze Tuesday evening and also into Wednesday, and that was a result of a wildfire on the other side of the country. At least 2,000 people have been displaced, although there are no deaths thus far. It is reported to be about 1/3 contained. A U.S. District Court judge ruled on Friday that DACA was unlawful, that the executive order issued by President Obama in 2012 is no good. The judge wrote that the immigration program for young adults should approve no more applicants for the time being, but also that the government should not deport or otherwise endanger anyone currently enrolled in the program. On Monday, a different federal judge upheld the vaccine requirement Indiana University is imposing on its students. Around 400 college campuses are mandating vaccines for COVID for students returning this fall, and this ruling signals that the hotly debated mandates are likely to hold across the country. Keep in mind that college students have been required to be vaccinated for other diseases long before COVID came around. Wall Street tumbled early this week, but it seems to be bouncing back. Take that for what it's worth. There is some concern about the Delta variant, though, as case counts continue to climb, including in Massachusetts. Provincetown became the first city in the state to reinstate a mask advisory following a cluster of cases traced to the 4th of July celebrations there. Many of the folks who got infected did have the vaccine. To our knowledge, none of the vaccinated people who caught COVID have been hospitalized. At the state level, not much to report. A couple of quick items. On Monday, the House passed the supplemental budget. This was the conference budget, so it's good to go. And included in that, I'm proud to say, is an extension of the mail-in voting through 2021. And so that will allow municipalities who still have elections in 2021, cities, including Boston, to use mail-in voting for the rest of the year. Now, the House had pushed to make that change permanent. The Senate was not interested in that, and so we came to this compromise. It is my hope that we will continue this conversation in the coming months and see if we can't make that permanent at a later date. Brookline received $200,000 in grant money from a state program to allow for the installation of 3 additional blue bike stations, planned loosely perhaps for Washington Square, Coolidge Corner, and Brookline Village, but there's some flexibility there. Brookline's 3rd marijuana store is nearing opening, all but one license from the state's Cannabis Control Commission in hand. Mission, Massachusetts, looks to open for appointments only on Com Ave in Brookline. And of course, the town is 4, and so this is the 3rd marijuana store. We'll see if the 4th license comes about or not. Lastly, I want to say thank you to school committee member Dimitri Ansalam, who served for a relatively brief time and has had to resign as he is moving out of town. And so I look forward to meeting the newest school committee member, and I thank Dimitri for his work on behalf of the town. And so without further ado, let's get into it. Stay tuned for our pre-recorded interview earlier this week with Select Board member, who do we interview? Miriam Aschkenasy. It's going to be great. And as promised this week, we've got the newest Select Board member, Miriam Aschkenasy, on the show. We spoke with her back in March or April when she was a candidate for the select board. But this is a totally different experience. And normally the first question I would ask is, what have you been doing from birth until now? But actually, what I'm going to ask is, what have you been doing from May 5th until now? What's it been like on the select board?
Well, hi, Tommy. Thanks for having me on again. And I'm really happy to talk about this. I have to say it's really a very enlightening experience. What the public sees, I think, is that, the 5 or 6 hours on Tuesday evenings when you're in the select board meeting, it has been a real revelation to me how many hours you spend prepping for that meeting and all of the work around being a select board member that doesn't happen in those 5 or 6 hours. So you get 5 or 6 or 7 committee assignments. I got a committee assignment that doesn't actually have a committee yet. So you have to write the charge, you have to get the staff, you have to advertise and interview people for the positions. So there's actually a lot that happens behind the scene. And before I forget, I really want to say a huge shout out to people like Devin Fields and Melissa Goff and Mel Kleckner and his team and their team. They do so much work to get us ready for the meetings on Tuesdays. And I just couldn't do it without it. We get a big folder with all the background information we need, which helps us be prepared.
So I want to hear about this folder. I know the folder exists, right? You get like a satchel delivered or something. What's that like? What's in the folder?
Well, the first thing that's in the folder, thankfully, is the Zoom link and the agenda. And then, essentially with every line item in the agenda, there are supporting documents. So if we're talking about promotions, there are all the letters and information regarding the work history, the recommendations for promotions, why. If we're talking about licensing, all of the documents required in order for a license to be up for a vote. So we actually get and look at all of that. And I think, when we're talking about, like recently we talked about signing a contract, everything that goes into that contract is there for us to review and look at. Some of it obviously is confidential, but a lot of it is available and open to the public, but it's really collated in it's one-stop shopping for us, thankfully, because of that wonderful team.
It's kind of like the combined reports, only you get it once a week instead of once for every town meeting.
And actually, sometimes it's hundreds of pages more than the combined reports.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot. So actually, you talked about prep, and this is part of that prep. You certainly don't have enough time to get down to the nitty gritty details for every single thing, right? I mean, at some point, you couldn't possibly. So how do you figure out where to dig deeper and where to just sort of say, well, this is run of the mill. There's nothing that smells funny here. Let's motor forward. How do you divvy up your time?
I mean, I think some of it is obvious, like the licensing, for the most part, when we are expected to vote on a license, I think it's fair to expect that all that paperwork is already in order. And so I skim that. I'm not reading very carefully. But when we are expected to vote on a cannabis license, then there are certain parts of that license I'm going to make sure to pay special attention to. Right. So I'm going to read their diversity plan. I'm going to look at their mitigation plan, especially because I'm on the cannabis mitigation committee. So I'm going to have questions related to those things. I'm not going to read, literally the cannabis license application is hundreds of pages. I'm not going to read all 300 pages, but I am going to skim for the parts that I think are really relevant that we have a sharp focus on. And I'm going to ask about those. And I think another good example is the US Open, right? They did a presentation. One of the issues that I ran on was my race equity lens. So I really try to have that lens on everything that comes to us. And that's really where I focus. Somebody else who knows more about golf can focus more on the issues, some of the issues related to parking and the use of the golf course. For me, the really what comes to the top is where's equity in this conversation?
So you talked about, the prep work and how that's significant and the public sort of just sees you on the air. What other surprises have you had in terms of the job versus maybe what the public thinks the job is?
I think actually the select board itself works very well together. There is a lot of collaborative, respectful discussion that happens, both in executive session and in the public. At the same time, I think each select board member holds their own. I mean, nobody on that select board is a pushover. Everybody has a well-informed opinion, even if it's not the same opinion. And I think for the most part, actually, the dialogue is essentially moves the conversation along one way or the other. And I appreciate that. I will say I thought about whether I should say this or not, but the amount of hate email and physical mail has surprised me. There are quite a few angry people.
Welcome.
Yeah, wow. I mean, and quite vicious. And I think I'm going to say it, often very ill-informed. So I think if I'm going to write an angry email, I want to at least be correct in my facts, but I find that is not the case. So that has definitely surprised me.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that we don't lead with, right? We want people to be engaged, and we want to hear from the public, and we also want people to run for office. So we don't tell them about that part first or right away, but it's real. It's one thing to disagree and be disagreeable, but there is, of course, a line about safety. And I know you recall someone crossed the line with Select Board Member Fernandez not too long ago, and there's no place for that. And that's a I don't know if it's a new thing or not. I haven't been in a major elected office long enough to know, but I hope that that was a one-off, and that kind of behavior stops, because there's no room for it. But I do want to talk about some positives. Look, I know you've been on the select board for June, July, right? Like 8 weeks, something like that.
Hot minute.
Not even, but you've already got some accomplishments, some things you're really proud of. So tell us about some of the things in your weeks of career that you feel like you made a difference on.
Well, I was very clear on the campaign trail, and it's actually very important for me to say this because, again, we harken back to some of that hate mail. I was very clear on the campaign trail on my stance with SROs and with the walk and talk program. And so that vote came up last month. And, also on top of my view on it, and the view of, I'm turning this off now totally. The view of the school committee and of the housing authority, I think it was very satisfying to then be able to vote and finally end those programs.
So I want to walk back. Not all of our viewers know what the heck you're talking about. So SRO or school resource officers, which are police officers who are working in the public schools. And the walk and talk was a community policing program of some kind or other. Maybe you could give us a little more about what they were doing, and help folks see why you and the majority of the board thought that we ought to be doing it differently.
So the school resource officer program is a program that put armed police officers in the K through high school setting. So K through 8 and a high school setting. And it began in 2019. And frankly, it began without any kind of agreement with the school committee. It just happened. And there's very little evidence that it had the intended impact. And frankly, I'm not even sure what the intended impact was. But one of the things the school committee did was an excellent survey where they had, I think, at least 600 students respond, where 70% of those students had no idea there was an SRO program. So to me, that's problematic, right? You have this program, we're paying for it. It has problems on one side, and then on the other side, 70% of the students don't even know it exists. But that means 30% of the students did know it existed. And for the students of color, especially who responded to this survey, this was an unwelcome program. So this is a perfect example of a race equity issue, right? Here you have students of color, they know about the program and they don't like it. And then you have 70% of the students who don't even know it exists. So this is an example of a program that can be redirected, and those officers can serve a much more functional purpose for the town. They don't need to be in our schools. And so that's why you saw the majority of the select board. That's why you saw the entire school committee recommend that the program be terminated. And that's why you saw the select board subsequently vote to end the program. For the walk and talk program, I am a big fan of community policing. The issue with the walk and talk program was that it was community policing for a very specific community, not for the whole community. It was community policing for the Brookline Housing Authority. And you have the same problem here where you query the individuals in the housing authority, and a significant number of them felt like this was surveillance. And if you have a program and you like it so much, it should be everywhere. It shouldn't be focused on one single population, and especially a population that historically has been over-policed. And so I think the idea was, and this was Heather's idea, and I think it was great, Chair Hamilton, let's take what we like about this program and focus on a different group. Like, let's look at seniors and how we can have more community policing with seniors. We don't really need to have a walk and talk program only focused on the Brookline Housing Authority. And so it's also an equity issue. And I think you really do have to understand the history of policing to understand why it's so problematic. And I was very happy to vote to terminate that program. And again, the Brookline Housing Authority also 4-1 wanted that program terminated. So we voted in favor of programs that those organizations themselves were directly affected also wanted us to vote in favor of terminating. So, and I felt very good about that. And I got a lot of hate mail.
Yeah, no, it's policing is one of those things where people have strong opinions that are often not driven by a deep understanding of criminology or sociology or much of anything other than their own personal experience. And of course, our experiences interacting with the police are dramatically different, driven by everything from our socioeconomic status to our personal demeanor, right? And so that doesn't surprise me. Of course, the legislature last year voted to enact some police reforms, and I heard from hundreds of constituents across the gamut of narrow details or very broad opinions in lots of different directions. And I know that you listened to those opinions and thought through it yourself, and you take your own experiences.
And I just want to add to that too. You know, this is a part of my professional space, right? I'm going to plug my boss here a little bit. My boss, Professor Khalid Gibran Mohammed, wrote a book called The Condemnation of Blackness, to really highlights how being Black was criminalized and how the data was used in a way to criminalize Black people, and the history of policing as a way to police poor people and people of color. And so I really intimately understand the history of policing in this country. And I am under no illusion that somehow Brookline is sacred or protected from those kind of structural framings and frameworks.
What so I have this idea for other select board members, but I won't speak for them. You came in interested in a couple of key areas. Obviously, you care about the health of the whole town. I have no doubt that you've learned some things about other parts of town government or other things happening in the town that, like, you were totally and blissfully unaware of. So tell us some of the things that you're like, wow, that's a thing, and I'm working on it, and I didn't even know about it 2 months ago.
I have to think about that. I mean, one of the things I did when I literally the first 2 weeks after I got elected, I got a list of all the directors, and I just called all of the department heads. And I said, hey, I'm the new select board member. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to introduce myself, hear what your concerns are, what you think is working, what's not working. Actually, one of the things immediately that I learned about that I had no idea that I think is really an important issue, and you will hear us talking a lot about it, is that the firehouses need to be renovated. And I hope still to go on a tour of the firehouses. The fire chief has offered such a tour, and I plan to take him up on it. And I really did not have a clue as to how pressing this issue was. And, I don't want to, but that we're going to very likely be looking at an override for this. And it's something that needs to be done. So that was, those are issues like that when I was talking to department heads that really came to the forefront of the discussions that I just had no clue about. I will say, I will shout out to Erin Galentine. I just was so impressed. Like, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. She has so much going on in her department. And she's the strategic lens that she puts on the execution of that department, I think is really fantastic. So
Erin Galentine being the commissioner of the Department of Public Works.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Recently named commissioner.
Recently named, yes. And I think, she came into this position and really, she took it with both hands and said, I am going to elevate this in a way that she really has done a fabulous job. And all of them, I've had fabulous discussions with the head of HR. Everyone really is invested in their work and does a great job, but a lot of innovation happening in that department, which I thought was nice to hear.
So I want to hear about your vision for the future. I'm going to ask you both parts now because I figure this way we'll get slightly different answers. I want to know what you're thinking about for your fingerprints on the town, for your, pushing the town in the right direction over the next year, and really over the next 3 years, over the length of your term. Yeah. Where are you thinking you're going to leave your mark?
Well, I already feel like in terms of the race equity work, it's already there, right? Even just those first votes, which were very powerful. And then recently we voted on, investing in businesses of women and marginalized communities and BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. I think it's that kind of work. It's very important to me. And that's really where I hope, in 3 years, that's part of my legacy. I came into this with the goal. What I like about why I reference Erin Galentine is because I think we, the town, need a process by which to create a more strategic approach to our work. Something like what she did for that department. And I think we need to do that for the town. And the problem is, of course, the time. So much time goes into the meetings, the prep for the meetings, the 6, 7, I lost count, committees that I'm on or in charge of getting off the ground. It's hard to carve out the time with the other select board members to figure out how to do a strategic planning process. I will say this, I do think that, Chair Hamilton spends a good deal of time and energy thinking about and executing efficiencies for the select board, which have made a big difference. And I think as the board continues to find more areas of efficiency, that will hopefully free up a little bit more time for us to start thinking more strategically.
Yeah, I don't think anybody runs to do liquor licenses all night long, right?
I mean, right. We don't need to do that. I think she's absolutely right. There's got to be a better way, right? They're just better at the risk of sounding cliche, there's better use of our time.
Yeah,
Literally.
no, I get it. Do you think differently? I wonder, so I know, and I'll tell the viewers that before you were elected to the select board, you were a member of town meeting from precinct 13. And I was a town meeting member. I've never been a select board member. So I think about, like, I'm a legislator, right? I'm team town meeting, right? And you're team select board. And I know it's not quite that simple, but do you think differently about town meeting and the way that town meeting sort of conducts its business now that you're sort of at the front of the room?
Only that I wish that town meeting members had a better understanding of our time constraints, because the request for select board led committees and then the pressure to get those committees going immediately is a tension, because we have 5, 6, 7 other committees. So there is this, I think, tension just in terms of again, efficiency and time constraint. I think that town meeting would benefit from a more strategic select board just as much as the select board would. I do think that, so we just had this, I was in Hawaii, but I did watch the select board meeting that I missed. And I saw your wonderful presentation on home rule petitions.
Oh, stop. Oh, stop.
and
Tell me more.
what I hope is, to me, the town meeting is the legislative branch and the select board is the executive branch. And we should keep ourselves in some sort of check and balance. And we can do that in a collegial way. And I don't see any reason why not. I only have a little more appreciation for the ask when town meeting writes warrant articles.
Well, and of course, the select board writes warrant articles too, although you have staff.
Yes, right.
So it's a different process, to be sure. You think town meeting is an institution we should hold on to?
No. I mean, I wasn't shy about this on the campaign trail. I think we're too big. And I see it now. And actually, as I sit on the select board, it only furthers my resolve that I think we need a different form of government for Brookline. And maybe some version of town meeting is that different form. But I think as we exist now, we could do better. And if that means I lose my job, fine. What I want is something that's more efficient, that has more accountability, that has a more strategic feel, that is more strategic. And I just think we've gotten too big. Town meeting, how it works with the select board, it's just too big. And so I would very much like to see us explore alternate forms of town government. That again might include some version of a town meeting or a city council. But I think that what we have now needs to be reevaluated very critically.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like I said, I'm team town meeting. Certainly open to the idea of change, but I'm still optimistic that that people representing a small neighborhood and hearing directly from their neighbors is a wonderful way to govern. It's not easy. And of course, the confines and structures of town meeting can feel like handcuffs sometimes. And I get the frustration, which is why I ask. And I think it's a really important conversation. Any last thoughts? Anything that folks should know about for the future, or what it's like sitting? I guess you had one select board meeting in person.
Yes.
Right. So like you sat in the front of the room. How was that?
I have to say, I enjoyed the in-person meeting. It is a different kind of challenge. I mean, obviously I have kids. So sometimes when I'm cutting my video off, it's just to make sure somebody's been fed. But I liked the in-person. It felt faster to me. The pace was faster. I like being able to see people's faces and read their body language. The chairs are comfortable. The snacks are good.
See, we're getting something right. We are out of time, though. I want to thank Brookline Interactive Group for hosting us, as always. Select Board Member Miriam Aschkenasy, thanks for coming on my show twice within a couple of months. And you're always very welcome to join us around here.
Thanks, Tommy.
Be well.